A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headache.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Imagine you are sitting in a reinforced concrete box. The walls are 2 feet thick. There is a heavy steel door bolted shut, and the air is getting a little stale because there are 20 other people in there with you. You can hear the muffled thuds of interceptions outside, but other than that, you are essentially in a sensory deprivation chamber. You look at your phone. No bars, no Wi-Fi. You have no idea if the attack is over, if there is a second wave coming, or if it is safe to go home to your family.
That is the reality for a huge portion of the population right now. Today's prompt from Daniel is about a very specific, very high-stakes engineering failure. We have these billion-dollar missile defense systems like the Iron Dome and David's Sling that can hit a target the size of a suitcase flying at supersonic speeds, but we haven't solved the last 50 feet of data transmission to the people sitting in public bomb shelters.
It is a wild paradox. We are living in 2026, the era of ubiquitous connectivity. Yet 30% of Israelis who do not have a modern safe room in their apartment are effectively stepping into the Stone Age every time a siren goes off. They are using these older public shelters that were built decades ago. No power, no internet, and the rebar in that concrete acts like a perfect Faraday cage. It's essentially a signal graveyard.
By the way, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash. And Corn, you hit on the human cost immediately. When people are starved for information, they make bad decisions. If you have been in a shelter for 40 minutes and you can't check the news, you get anxious. You think maybe it's over. You crack the door, you step out, and that is exactly when shrapnel from an interception falls. We are seeing injuries not from the missiles themselves, but from premature exits caused by information blackouts.
I'm Herman Poppleberry, and my brother Corn and I are going to deconstruct how to fix this, because this isn't just a nice to have like getting Twitter in the bunker. This is life safety infrastructure. Herman, you've been looking into the physics of why our phones just give up the ghost the second we step down those stairs. Why is the cellular signal so uniquely bad in these spots? Is it just the thickness of the wall, or is there more to it?
It's a combination of factors, but it primarily comes down to attenuation and frequency. Most cellular signals operate in the 1800 MHz to 2100 MHz range, or even higher for 5G. Those high-frequency waves are great for carrying lots of data, but they are terrible at penetrating dense materials. A standard concrete wall can easily knock 30 to 40 decibels off your signal strength. By the time you get into a basement shelter, you are looking at a signal loss of maybe 60 or 70 decibels. That takes you from a full-strength signal to well below the noise floor where your phone can't even see the tower.
And that rebar you mentioned, that's not just structural, right?
The rebar is a grid of steel. When the spacing of that grid is smaller than the wavelength of the signal trying to pass through it, it acts as a Faraday cage. It reflects the electromagnetic waves back outside or absorbs them into the ground. So even if you have a massive cell tower right across the street, the physics of that room are actively working to keep you in the dark.
But wait, if the rebar is acting as a shield, wouldn't that mean even a tiny gap like a ventilation pipe or a slightly ajar door would let the signal flood in? Or is it more like a light bulb, where if you're not in the direct line of sight of the leak, you're still in the dark?
It's more like the light bulb analogy, but with diffraction. Radio waves can bend around corners to an extent, but every time they bounce off a concrete wall to get around a corner, they lose a massive amount of energy. By the time the signal bounces from the street, down the stairwell, through the heavy steel door, and into the main room of the shelter, it's essentially exhausted. It's like trying to fill a swimming pool using only the moisture from a damp sponge.
That makes sense. But Daniel mentioned something interesting in his notes about SMS. He says SMS might actually be the cockroach of communication here, the thing that survives when everything else dies. Why does a text get through when I can't even load a web page or make a voice call? I've noticed this myself. Sometimes a text pops through even when I have no service showing on the top bar.
This is a fantastic bit of cellular engineering that most people don't realize. Voice calls and data sessions require a stable, high-quality connection on what's called a traffic channel. You usually need a signal strength of about -85 dBm for a reliable voice call. But SMS is different. It travels on the control channel, the low-level signaling path the phone uses just to stay registered with the tower. The control channel is incredibly robust. It can often function at -110 dBm.
So we are talking about a 25 decibel difference in sensitivity. In logarithmic terms, that is massive.
It is huge. It's the difference between hearing a whisper in a quiet room versus trying to hear a whisper at a rock concert. Because SMS packets are so tiny, just a few hundred bytes, they can be squeezed through the tiniest gaps in coverage. If a shelter has even a tiny bit of leakage through a vent or a heavy door, an SMS might just make it. It's like water finding a crack in a dam.
Okay, so if SMS is the silver bullet, how do we weaponize it for safety? If I'm a developer, I'm thinking, pull the Homefront Command API every 30 seconds, see if the all clear has been issued for a specific city, and then blast an SMS to everyone registered in that shelter. But how do you handle the sheer volume?
That is exactly the architecture Daniel was looking at. You can use a service like Twilio or a local Israeli SMS gateway. The cost is the best part. We are talking maybe $5 a month per shelter for the API polling and the message credits. Compare that to the $50,000 or more it costs a municipality to install a professional cellular repeater or a fiber optic drop into a basement.
$5 versus 50,000. I like those numbers. But Herman, there is a catch, right? If 20,000 people in Tel Aviv are all in shelters and the system tries to send 20,000 individual SMS messages at the exact same second, the all clear hits, doesn't the network congest?
It can. That is the thundering herd problem. If the local cell site is already under stress because everyone is trying to call their families, those SMS messages might be delayed by a few minutes. In a life safety situation, a 3-minute delay is an eternity. People might have already left the shelter. That is why we need to look at local infrastructure, things that don't rely on the broader cellular network being perfect.
Which brings us to the Wi-Fi relay chains. This one sounds like something out of a spy movie or a college dorm prank. You're talking about taking those little travel routers and just daisy chaining them down the stairs. How does that actually work without a technician involved?
It is surprisingly effective. Daniel pointed out the GL.I Net GLMT 3000 routers. These things are tiny. They run on 5-volt USB power, so you can plug them into a standard power bank, and they support high-performance Wi-Fi 6. The idea is you put one router at the entrance of the shelter where it can still see the street-level 5G or Wi-Fi. Then you put a second one at the first landing of the stairs and a third one inside the shelter.
So it's a wireless hop. You're basically catching the signal at the door and throwing it down the throat of the bunker. But doesn't every hop cut the speed in half?
It does, but we don't need gigabit speeds in a bunker. We need enough bandwidth to refresh a Telegram channel or load a news site. Even with 3 hops, you're still getting plenty of speed for text-based information. And because you're using Wi-Fi, you're not dealing with the same attenuation issues as the signal coming from a tower a mile away. You are creating a private local network. The setup time is what kills me. You can do this in 30 seconds. No drilling, no cables, no municipal permits. If you are a volunteer group or a neighborhood watch, you just buy 3 of these for $40 each, tape them to the wall during an emergency, and suddenly everyone in the basement has a heartbeat to the outside world.
I love the no permits part. Knowing how bureaucracy works, by the time the city approves a cable run, the war will be over and we'll be living on Mars. But what about the power? If these public shelters don't have outlets, which many of them don't, they are literally just concrete rooms. How long can a battery bank keep a router alive?
A standard 20,000 milliamp hour power bank can run one of those travel routers for about 15 to 20 hours of active use. Since a typical event lasts maybe an hour or two, you could leave those routers in a sleep state or just turn them on when the siren goes off, and they would last for weeks of intermittent use. It's a very low-maintenance solution for a high-intensity problem.
It's a great DIY fix, but it still feels a bit fragile. Like if one person kicks a router over on their way down the stairs, the whole chain breaks. That's why I'm interested in the LoRa mesh idea. Daniel mentioned Meshtastic. For the uninitiated, Herman, give us the breakdown on why LoRa is better for concrete than Wi-Fi. What makes it so resilient?
This goes back to the physics of frequency. Wi-Fi operates at 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. Those are very fast waves, but they hate walls. LoRa in Israel operates on the 868 megahertz band. Lower frequency means longer wavelengths. Longer wavelengths are much better at diffracting around corners and penetrating solid objects.
So it's the difference between a high-pitched whistle and a bass drum. You can hear the bass drum through the walls of the house next door, but you can't hear the whistle.
Perfect analogy. In a test environment, you might see 30 to 40 decibels of loss for Wi-Fi through a concrete barrier, but only 15 to 20 decibels for LoRa. That is a massive advantage. Meshtastic is an open-source firmware that turns cheap $30 radio boards, like the ESP32-based ones, into a self-healing mesh network. You don't need a central router. Every device talks to every other device.
So, if I have a node on the roof of the shelter and another node inside, they just find each other? And what happens if you have 10 nodes in the same neighborhood?
They find each other, and they pass messages. If you have a whole city covered in these nodes, which is actually happening in places like Sderot and parts of Jerusalem, you create a parallel internet that doesn't rely on cell towers or ISP fiber. If one node goes down, the message just routes through another one. You could have a central gateway that is connected to the Homefront Command API, and it broadcasts the all clear as a tiny text packet across the mesh. Every node in every shelter picks it up and displays it.
Wait, how tiny are we talking? If I'm on a LoRa mesh, can I send a photo of the interception to show my family I'm okay?
No, and that's a crucial distinction. LoRa is the slow and steady tortoise. We are talking about byte rates measured in kilobits per second, sometimes even bits per second depending on the range. You can send a text message, maybe a GPS coordinate, or a status code. Trying to send a high-res photo over LoRa would take 20 minutes and probably clog the entire neighborhood's mesh. It's purely for critical data. It's the telegraph of the 21st century.
And since the power draw of LoRa is so low, you could stick a tiny solar panel on the outdoor unit and it would run forever. You're building a permanent, decentralized safety net. But let's talk about the display. If I'm an 80-year-old grandmother in a dark shelter, I'm not opening a Meshtastic app on my phone. I need something simpler. How do we get that data to someone who isn't a power user?
This is where the dedicated alert receiver comes in. This is probably my favorite solution because it's so elegant. You take an ESP32 microcontroller, pair it with a cheap cellular modem like the SIM 7080G, and attach a 2.9-inch e-ink display.
Why e-ink? Why not just a big red LED or a cheap LCD screen?
Power and readability. An LCD screen is a power hog. It needs a backlight. An e-ink display only uses power when the image changes. You could have a screen that says shelter status, stay inside in giant red letters, and it will stay that way for years without using a single microamp of power. When the API says it's safe, the screen flips to status, AL clear, safe to XD in green. It's readable in direct sunlight or a dim basement.
It's the traffic light principle. Zero cognitive load. You don't have to be tech literate, you just look at the wall. If it's red, stay put. If it's green, go home. And you could even add a piezo buzzer for an audible cue when the status changes.
And the bill of materials for that. The BOM is maybe $25 to $35 if you're buying in small quantities. If a municipality bought 10,000 of them, you could probably get that down to $15. Think about that. For the price of one fancy lunch in Tel Aviv, you could provide a permanent battery-backed safety terminal for an entire public shelter. It's a rounding error in a city budget, but the impact on public peace of mind is immeasurable.
It seems like a no-brainer. So why isn't it everywhere? Is this where the regulatory gray area comes in? I know Israel is pretty strict about radio transmissions. Is there a legal hurdle to putting these in public spaces?
It's a bit of a mess. Technically, the Ministry of Communications has very strict rules about cellular signal boosters, the things that grab a signal from outside and rebroadcast it inside. If they aren't installed by a licensed carrier, They are illegal because they can cause interference with the towers. They can actually scream so loud that they deafen the cell site for everyone else.
So if I try to be a hero and install a cheap booster in my basement, I might actually be making the signal worse for the whole neighborhood.
Potentially. It can create a feedback loop that knocks out the tower for hundreds of people, and the government is worried about people using uncertified hardware that hasn't been tested for safety or interference. But the solutions we're talking about, the SMS polling, the LoRa mesh, the dedicated e-ink receivers, they aren't boosters, they are end-user devices. They operate just like a phone or a smart meter. They aren't trying to rebroadcast the whole LTE spectrum, they are just receiving and displaying specific data points.
So they should be legal, but there's no clear framework for civic safety tech yet. It feels like the technology is moving at light speed, and the policy is stuck in a bunker of its own.
That is often the case. But in an emergency, people tend to favor forgiveness over permission. We are seeing volunteer groups just going out and doing it. They are building these ESP32 kits and mounting them in shelters with heavy-duty mounting tape. It's a grassroots infrastructure movement. They aren't waiting for a 5-year municipal planning committee to decide on the color of the casing.
I want to go back to a point Daniel made that I think is the most important technical takeaway of the whole episode, the heartbeat concept. Herman, explain why silence is the most dangerous thing in a shelter. Why can't we just have the screen stay blank until there's an update?
This is a classic failure in human factors engineering. If I have an app or a screen, and the screen is blank, most people assume nothing is happening, so it must be fine. But in a bunker, a blank screen could mean the battery died, the cell tower was hit, or the API is down. If you assume silence means safe, you are gambling with your life. You need a positive confirmation of state.
It's the fail deadly versus fail safe problem.
Right. A true life safety system must have a heartbeat. The screen should have a little blinking indicator or a timestamp that says last updated 10 seconds ago. If that timestamp stops moving, or if a system online light goes out, you know the information is unreliable. You have to treat the system as broken rather than quiet. It forces the user to seek information elsewhere rather than assuming they are safe when they aren't.
It's like those old miner's lamps. If the flame goes out, you don't think, oh, the air is so clean the fire isn't needed. You realize you're about to pass out from lack of oxygen, and you get out of there.
Precisely. Any DIY solution needs to include this. If you're building a Wi-Fi relay, the SSID shouldn't just be shelter Wi-Fi. It should be shelter Wi-Fi ACTI. If you can't see the network, you know you're disconnected. It's about building trust in the interface. If the interface can't prove it's working, it shouldn't be trusted at all.
So, how does that work in practice for the LoRa mesh? If I'm in a shelter and my node loses its connection to the gateway outside, what does the user see? Does it just say, connection lost?
Ideally, yes. In a well-designed mesh-tastic implementation for safety, the screen would default to a searching or a noun state the second it misses 2 consecutive heartbeats from the mesh gateway. You never want a stale ALL clear message hanging on an e-ink screen from 3 hours ago if the mesh is currently down. The screen has to be honest about its own ignorance.
So, looking at the landscape, we have these different tiers. Tier 1 is the software-only fix, the SMS alerts. Low cost, high reach, but dependent on the cellular network not being totally slammed. Tier 2 is the ad hoc hardware, the Wi-Fi relay chains. Fast to deploy, great for volunteers, but a bit fragile. Tier 3 is the community infrastructure, the LoRa mesh. Robust, long range, but requires a bit more technical setup. And Tier 4 is the municipal gold standard, the dedicated e-ink receivers in every shelter.
If I were a city manager in Haifa or Tel Aviv, I would be looking at Tier 4. It's the most resilient. You could hardwire those into the shelter's emergency lighting circuit so they never run out of juice. But for Daniel and people in his situation right now, Tier 2 and Tier 3 are where the action is. You can go on Amazon or a local tech site today, buy a couple of mesh-tastic capable boards, and have a working communication link by tomorrow afternoon. It's the ultimate weekend warrior project with actual life-saving potential.
It's amazing how much of this comes down to just being smart with the spectrum. We think of the internet as this big monolithic thing that comes through a fiber optic cable, but it's really just a series of handshakes. And those handshakes can happen over LoRa, or SMS control channels, or a daisy chain of travel routers. We've become so used to high bandwidth luxury that we've forgotten how to communicate on the low and slow channels that actually survive disasters.
And we should look at how other countries handle this. Japan is the gold standard for earthquake alerts. They have dedicated physical hardware in public spaces, loudspeakers, screens, and even specialized FM radio receivers that automatically turn on when a specific wake-up tone is broadcast. They realized long ago that you cannot rely on the consumer cellular network during a mass-scale emergency. It will always fail when you need it most. Even the best 5G network in the world isn't designed for 100,000 people all trying to stream video or make calls simultaneously in a square mile.
Because everyone is doing exactly what they should do, calling their loved ones. The network is designed for average load. Not everyone is terrified at 3 a.m. load.
Israel has the siren system, which is great for the get-in signal. But the stay-in or get-out signal is much more nuanced. Sometimes you need to stay in for 10 minutes because of shrapnel. Sometimes you need to stay in for 2 hours because of a multi-wave attack. A siren can't communicate that nuance. A screen can. A screen can tell you, arrival in North Tel Aviv, stay in for 15 minutes. That specificity saves lives and prevents panic.
You know, it reminds me of the old civil defense radios from the Cold War era. They had those little triangles on the dial for the Conelrad stations. It was a very analog version of what we're talking about. A dedicated, low-bandwidth channel that everyone knew how to access. We've replaced that with 1,000 different apps, but we've lost that universal, hardened reliability.
That's a great point. We traded resilience for features. An app can show you a map of the incoming missiles, which is cool, but if the app won't load because the tower is congested, the map is useless. A blinking red light that says Tay is infinitely more valuable in that moment than a non-responsive high-tech dashboard.
Let's talk about the broader implications here. This isn't just about Israel. We're seeing more and more conflict zones where the front line is a civilian apartment building. Whether it's Ukraine or other parts of the world, this problem of civilian resilience in degraded environments is going to be one of the biggest engineering challenges of the 21st century. How do we keep people informed when the infrastructure they rely on is targeted or overwhelmed?
It's the smart city versus the resilient city. We spent the last 20 years making cities smart, connecting everything to the cloud. But the cloud is fragile. It relies on power, subsea cables, and functioning satellites. A resilient city is one where the basement still knows what the roof is seeing, even if the fiber lines are cut. It's about local data loops.
It's back to basics. It's decentralization. It's taking the open source ethos and applying it to physical safety. I think it's really cool that Daniel and other developers are looking at this and saying, I can't fix the geopolitics, but I can damn sure make sure my neighbor knows when it's safe to come out of the basement. It's a very practical, very human application of high-level engineering.
That is the ultimate weird prompt success story, honestly. Taking these technical toys, LoRa, ESP32s, E-Ink, and turning them into something that literally prevents injuries. It's not about the coolest feature set, it's about the highest reliability.
So, if you are listening to this and you've got some technical chops, what is the call to action here? If you're in a conflict zone or even an area prone to natural disasters where the power goes out, what should you be doing? Is there a specific kit you'd recommend?
Number 1. Look into Meshtastic. It is the most mature, community-driven radio mesh out there. Get a couple of nodes. The Heltec V3 is a popular choice. Learn how to flash the firmware and see if there is already a local mesh in your city. Number 2. If you're a developer, look at the Homefront Command API or your local equivalent. Build a heartbeat monitor. Make it so simple a child could understand it. Don't over-engineer the UI.
What about the last mile of the last mile? Like, if you're in a shelter and you have one person with a Meshtastic node, how do they share that info with the other 19 people without everyone hovering over one tiny OLED screen?
That's where the shelter Wi-Fi bridge comes in. You can actually set up a Meshtastic node to act as a Wi-Fi access point. People join the Wi-Fi, and it serves a very simple local web page that just displays the mesh status. No internet, just a local bulletin board. It's a great way to distribute that tiny bit of data to everyone's existing devices without needing a cell signal.
And number 3, don't wait for the government. They are great at the big stuff, the interceptors and the sirens, but they are historically slow at the last mile of civilian tech. This is a space where the hacker community can actually save lives by filling the gaps that municipal budgets haven't reached yet.
I think that is a perfect place to wrap the technical side. It's a sobering topic, but there is so much potential for clever engineering to move the needle. We have the tools, we just need to deploy them in the places that are currently invisible to the network.
Definitely. We've gone from the physics of signal attenuation to the practicalities of e-ink displays. It just goes to show that there is no such thing as a simple problem when you're dealing with 2 feet of reinforced concrete and the safety of 20 people.
And a lot of stressed out people. Don't forget the human element. The tech has to serve the person, not the other way around. If it adds to the stress, it's a bad design. It needs to be the calm voice in the room.
Well said, Herman Poppleberry. Today's episode of My Weird Prompts was a deep dive into the bunkers. We really appreciate Daniel sending this one in. It's a great example of how a very specific local problem can have a fascinating global technical solution. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes and making sure we don't wander too far off into the weeds.
And a huge thank you to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. We couldn't do this without that specialized compute. It's what keeps our own heartbeats going.
If you found this discussion useful, or if you're working on your own shelter connectivity solutions, we want to hear from you. We're curious to see if anyone has tried using Starlink near shelter entrances or other satellite-based backups. Find us at myweirdprompts.com for the RSS feed and all the ways to subscribe.
Stay safe out there, keep your heartbeats active, and we'll talk to you in the next one.
This has been My Weird Prompts.
Goodbye.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We shake